someday my spirit will rise from my grave and you all know that I was right. I'll hit them.
Mr. Boisvert. Mr. Boisvert.
This isn't a trial montage. It's a stress test of the justice system. One defendant boasts and threatens, another grooms teenagers, then snarls at the bench. A third turns capital sentencing into an ideological broadcast. And yet verdicts land. Sentences stand. Order returns inch by inch because due process runs like a checklist. Notice, counsel, confrontation, evidence. You'll watch the tactics defendants use to delay, distract, and intimidate, and the precise procedural tools that pull the focus back to the record. Stick around, because the details matter. Start with the power of persona, where image sells belonging and control tries to subvert the courtroom.
Can we do a fair trial in Jefferson County? But then another part of it is, if we have a concern, Rhodes, you're smiling. I don't know why you're smiling.
Because I can.
Well?
Because I can. It's not a crime to smile.
We start with Rhodes, persona, grooming, and a courtroom built to withstand intimidation. He sold a brand and a lifestyle. The stage name, the videos, the borrowed shine. But the thing about this case is the gap between image and command. Prosecutors drew a straight line from that persona to a chain of control around two minors, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon stepbrothers, who moved in his orbit and ended up dead. You're not asked to buy celebrity here. You're asked to measure influence. Grooming a minor for criminal exploitation isn't just manipulation. It's recognized in many states as an aggravating factor that heightens culpability, especially when it leads to violence against children. Brice Rhodes presented himself as an artist with access studio nights, rides, parties, screens full of staged wealth. Offstage, the record shows proximity to those brothers, contact that evolved into directives. The evidence suggests a hierarchy in which he sat at the top and younger followers filled roles beneath him. That dual identity, performer and organizer, set the tone for everything that followed in court. Charisma became leverage, not subtle either. Status symbols worked like keys that opened doors, and once inside, access didn't come free. If you wanted to belong, you showed loyalty. If you wanted the next invite, you followed orders. That's how alleged enforcement takes root. Favors, errands, and acts meant to prove allegiance. By the time consequences arrive, the group has already normalized risk. The motive matters. Before the brothers were killed, 40-year-old Christopher Jones was shot and killed in a separate incident tied to Rhodes' a mistaken identity hit while trying to collect a bounty. Larry and Maurice were witnesses to that homicide. The evidence suggests Rhodes viewed them as a threat who could talk to police. That fear of exposure is what prosecutors said pulled the trigger on everything that followed. In Kentucky, murdering a witness to prevent testimony violates KRS 507.0201 as capital murder with the aggravating circumstance. Under KRS 532.0252, killing to suppress evidence or silence a witness. Which brings us to the courtroom. You saw it in the disruptions. Threats tossed at the bench and even at the judge's family. Direct threats against a judge or their family breach KRS 524.040, intimidating a participant in the legal process, a Class C felony on its own, and trigger immediate contempt powers under KRS 421.140. A spit mask used when warnings didn't work. Bailiff stood closer. He spit on a court-appointed attorney, fought with counsel, and refused to let lawyers speak for him, cycling through multiple attorneys until the court imposed tighter controls. He was eventually restrained to his chair. That contempt and assaultive behavior added separate charges and justified physical restraints throughout trial, ensuring the jury never lost focus. The judge tightened decorum one step at a time, admonitions first, then restraints. Those moves weren't flair. They were safeguards designed to keep testimony moving. If you can unsettle the room, you can stall the process. That's the play. The court didn't let it land. Grooming is the quiet architecture behind that leverage. In plain terms, it's a pattern. Offer validation, control access, then make both scarce. The scarcity builds dependency. When Rhodes put himself at the center, music videos, props, curated attention, it created a funnel. If he alone decides who gets time and status, he also decides who gets cut off. That's power over decisions, not just people. Speaking of evidence, interrogations from Anwan Carter and Jackery Taylor came into focus. They cooperated. Carter was 15, Taylor 17, both minors who were manipulated and then folded into the case. Plea agreements entered the record. Prosecutors used their statements to map who gave orders and who carried them out. That's a standard tactic in a conspiracy-style case. Start at the edges, move inward, and test each narrative against physical evidence and timelines. If two accounts align on key points, you get a framework a jury can audit. The family's presence cut through the theatrics. You saw Elizabeth Wren's grief harden when Rhodes smiled and gestured toward her. She was removed from the courtroom after confronting that behavior, later telling reporters her faith could not extend to forgiveness, calling him sick, a demon. Their words didn't need volume to carry weight. They grounded the case in loss and consequence. In that moment, the performance value of defiance shrank. The jury had people to hold in mind, not just conduct to watch. The verdict answered the posture. Guilty. Sentencing made the stakes final life without parole on 3 capital murder counts, plus additional terms for tampering with witnesses and intimidation. The record shows that disruption didn't eclipse testimony, and charisma didn't erase evidence. And when intimidation walked into court, procedure walked in with it, masks, restraints, calibrated warnings tools you'll see tested again when threats and ideology try to overrun the bench.
Mr. Boisvert. Mr. Boisvert.
Boisvert and Cross test where authority ends and accountability begins. Start with Anthony Boisvert. At arraignment, he faced allegations tied to a fire that destroyed the First Baptist Church, a historic structure built in 1870 with damages exceeding $2 million, another fire set at a residential building, and retaliatory stabbings of 2 people he believed were police informants. High bail set the stakes. His stance did the rest. When asked if he had anything to say before bail was set, he answered,
I think you should give me about $500 bail so I can go and stab my cousin to death. Maybe kill my aunt and my uncle Kevin. Maybe I can cut him up and eat him on a frying pan.
That statement was immediately treated as a terrorist threat under Massachusetts law, MGLC 269, Section 14, and a new criminal complaint for threatening to commit murder, instantly justifying denial of bail and heightened security. The record shows that statement landed as a direct threat, aimed at the court and the community. That posture wasn't theater. It was intimidation directed at the process itself. Outbursts shift the balance. Every threat forces the bench to reassess risk. If a defendant keeps speaking over the judge, you need more than a warning. You need structure. That's where restraints, tight calendars, and security protocols enter. Jurors have to feel safe. Staff have to work without fear. The judge has to keep the case moving because delay can become a tactic. Judges have a toolkit for decorum. Warnings first. If conduct escalates, restraints. If spitting or disruption continues, masks. Defense counsel then stands in a vice, protect the client's rights, advise against self-harm in open court, and preserve a record for appeal. That's an ethical duty, not public relations. You hear the lawyer ask for time, request evaluations, and try to redirect because the transcript matters. Legally speaking, the standard is clear. Courts weigh safety against the defendant's right to be present. Under established case law, including Illinois v. Allen 1970, a judge can remove or restrain a defendant who won't follow rules after warning. Think of due process as a checklist you have to complete while the room shakes notice, counsel, confrontation, a chance to be heard. If misconduct blocks a step, the court adds control until the step can happen. Shift to Kansas and Frazier Glenn Cross, also known as Frazier Glenn Miller Jr. It's a capital murder case.
One day, my spirit will rise from my grave, and you all know that I was right. How hit?
On April 13th, 2014, he shot and killed 3 people at Jewish sites in Overland Park. 69-year-old William Corporon, his 14-year-old grandson, Reed Underwood, and 53-year-old Terry Lamano. A former KKK leader, he believed his victims were Jewish. None were. He represented himself and made his extremist ideology explicit. He hailed Hitler, performed Nazi salutes, called himself righteous and moral, and told jurors their consciences would torment them if they took the easy way out. He even asked for celebratory whiskey after the shootings. Every anti-Semitic outburst risked violating Kansas courtroom rules against irrelevant prejudicial speech and contempt statutes, KSA 20-1, 20320-1, 204, giving the judge grounds to cut him off instantly. The proceeding risked becoming a broadcast, and the judge had to narrow it back to evidence. Now let's look at the procedure for self-representation. Ferretta versus California. 1975 rights allow a competent defendant to act as their own lawyer, but only if the waiver is knowing and voluntary. The court still appoints standby counsel to step in if needed and to protect the record. Judges enforce the rules of relevance and evidence to prevent a trial from turning into propaganda. When Cross veered into speeches, the bench pulled him back to admissible proof. The judge issued warnings and prepared for outbursts, making it clear that if disruption continued, backup lawyers would take over and he would be removed. Jury selection had to proceed 12, plus alternates even as the court managed his conduct. Cross called his son, Frazier Glenn Miller III, who told the jury he disagreed with his father's beliefs but did not want to see him die. That testimony cut through posture and marked the human cost of ideology. 2 courtrooms, different charges, different stakes. The outcomes diverged, but the method to cut through disruption was the same. Procedure first, jury focus second, and everything else behind that line. Cross received a death sentence by lethal injection under Kansas's capital statute KSA 216620 and died in 2021 on death row at age 80. Boisvert's conduct underscored why courts invest in layered security and strict schedules to protect the public, safeguard staff, and keep a case moving toward a verdict. He ultimately took a plea for 25 to 50 years on arson, attempted murder, and the fresh threat charges. What lingers isn't volume. It's how due process applied, step by step, pulls attention back to evidence and the voices that matter. So here's where the cases land and why the outcomes matter. Theatrics can flood a courtroom. Think of due process like a checklist you must complete under pressure: notice, counsel, confrontation, a chance to be heard. When that list stays intact, performance loses power. Rhodes received life without parole. Cross received a death sentence and later died in prison. Boisvert received 25 to 50 years. Those results reflect a system that prioritizes rules over noise. The record shows why limits exist. Warnings, restraints, and tight rulings aren't flair. They're guardrails keeping the jury on lawful ground. Let me know in the comments were the court's limits on disruption justified under the law. If you want more deep dives into justice and procedure, hit subscribe. Subscribe and follow Red Tape Red Flag on all platforms. And don't forget to like, share, and comment.